Sometimes a baby will look directly into your eyes and then suddenly look away. It can feel like they lost interest or got distracted. But neuroscience suggests something very different is happening in that moment. Looking away may actually be one of the smartest things. A baby's brain knows how to do that moment. The break in eye contact has been studied in laboratories across the world for decades, not because it's a small curiosity, but because researchers began to realize that what a baby does when it looks away tells us more about human cognition than what it does when it looks toward. Because the brain that looks away on purpose is a brain that is managing itself, regulating itself, making a decision below the level of conscious thought, that it needs space to process what just happened. That is not distraction. That is intelligence. And the deeper scientists looked into this single, fleeting behavior, this tiny turn of a tiny head, the more they found themselves staring into fundamental questions about how the human mind works, about attention, about overload, about the extraordinary sophistication of a nervous system that has barely had time to exist. This is not a story about babies losing focus. This is a story about what the brain does when it hits its limit, and why knowing that limit and respecting it may be one of the most important things one human being can do for another. The instinctive human interpretation of a baby looking away is almost universal. They're bored. They lost interest. Something else caught their attention. You weren't stimulating enough. The moment passed. Parents feel it as a small rejection, a brief sting of disconnection. You were holding their gaze and then gone, off to stare at a ceiling corner or a patch of light on the wall. And for a long time, developmental psychology more or less agreed with that reading. The infant attention span was considered extremely short, extremely fragile, and largely at the mercy of whatever sensory input happened to be loudest in the environment. The baby looked away because something else won the competition for its attention. Simple as that. But that explanation has a problem. Several problems, actually. Because if it were purely about competition for attention, if the baby simply defaulted to whatever stimulus was most intense, then the look away should be unpredictable, random, governed entirely by the external environment. But it isn't random. Researchers who began timing and categorizing these gaze aversions found that they followed patterns. They occurred after specific durations of engagement. They occurred more frequently during periods of high stimulation. They occurred less frequently when the adult interaction was calm and regulated. The environment wasn't pulling the baby's gaze away. Something inside the baby was pushing it. And when scientists began asking what that internal force actually was, the answer changed everything about how we understand infant cognition. In the 1970s, a researcher named T. Barry Brazelton, a pediatrician and developmental specialist at Harvard Medical School, began documenting infant interaction patterns with a precision that nobody had applied before. He filmed hours of baby caregiver exchanges in slow motion, frame by frame. And what he observed in those recordings was not chaos. It was not randomness. It was cycles. Babies, he found, moved through predictable rhythms of engagement and disengagement. They would orient toward a face, maintain eye contact, increase their level of arousal and responsiveness, and then, at a certain point, they would turn away, look down, look sideways, go BRIE-FLY, quiet, and then after a short pause, cycle back into engagement again. Brazelton called it the engagement-disengagement cycle, and he argued that it was not a failure of attention. It was the fundamental unit of infant self-regulation. The baby wasn't leaving the interaction. The baby was managing the interaction, stepping briefly outside of it to process, regulate, and then return. Decades later, neuroscientists equipped with brain imaging technology caught up to what Brazelton had observed behaviorally and found the neural mechanism underneath it. When a young infant engages in face-to-face eye contact, particularly with emotional intensity, the brain's arousal systems spike rapidly. The limbic system activates, heart rate elevates, cortisol fluctuates. The entire nervous system mobilizes in response to what it correctly identifies as an extremely significant social event. And there is a threshold, a point at which the incoming information exceeds the brain's current capacity to process it in real time. At that moment, a protective response activates. The gaze breaks, the head turns, the sensory input is reduced, not because the baby doesn't care, but because the baby cares so much that the brain needed a moment to catch up. Researchers at the University of Massachusetts found that this regulatory gaze aversion was associated with measurable decreases in heart hunt feeling, rate, and cortisol within seconds of the look away. The baby's physiology was literally calming itself, resetting, preparing to re-engage. The look away was not an exit. It was a breath. Here is the part that reframes the entire picture. What the baby is doing when it looks away is something that most adults have completely lost the ability to do. It is setting a boundary with its own nervous system. Think about that. A being with no language, no conscious self-awareness, no understanding of psychology or emotional regulation, or any of the concepts we use as adults to describe our inner states. And yet, its brain has already implemented a self-protective mechanism so precise, so well-timed, so physiologically effective, that therapists spend years teaching adults to approximate it. We call it, in adult terms, taking space, stepping back, not letting a situation overwhelm you before you've had time to process it. Babies do it automatically, instinctively, because they haven't yet learned to override it. That's the key word, override. Because what happens as we grow older, what socialization, education, and social pressure slowly teach us is to ignore the signal, to push through the overwhelm, to maintain eye contact even when our nervous system is screaming for a moment to breathe, to stay in the conversation, the argument, the emotionally flooded situation, long past the point where our brain can actually process what's happening. We unlearn the look away, and in doing so, we lose one of the most elegant self-regulatory tools the human nervous system ever developed. The baby looking away from your eyes is not rejecting you. The baby is demonstrating a form of emotional intelligence that took you years to lose and may take years more to rediscover. But here's where it gets even stranger, because the look away isn't just about the baby's brain managing itself. New research suggests it's also sending a signal, a message directed specifically at you. And if you know how to read it, if you respond to it in a particular way, something remarkable happens to both of you. Picture a research lab at the University of Edinburgh. Early Arlene Estan, a psychologist named Tricia Striano, is running an experiment that sounds almost too simple to be interesting. She sets mothers across from their infants. She asks the mothers to do one of two things during the session. Either respond naturally to their baby following the baby's lead, matching their energy, pausing when the baby looks away, or maintain a still, flat expression, unresponsive, present but emotionally inert. It's a version of what researchers call the still face paradigm, originally developed by Edward Tronick at Harvard. And what happens in both versions of this experiment is one of the most emotionally striking sequences ever, documented in developmental science. In the natural interaction, the cycle works exactly as Brazelton described. The baby engages, the mother responds, the baby hits its threshold, it looks away. The mother, following her instinct, pauses, waits, gives the baby space, and when the baby cycles back ready to re-engage, the mother is still there, warm, available, and the interaction resumes, deepened by the pause. The look away was answered correctly. The baby's nervous system registered. When I need space, the world waits for me. When I return, the connection is still there. Now in the still-faced condition, when the mother becomes unresponsive, something entirely different unfolds. The baby engages as normal, smiles, vocalizes, reaches out, and gets nothing back. A face that is present but absent. Eyes that are open but empty. The baby tries harder, escalates its bids for connection, smiles more intensely, reaches further, And when none of it works, the behavior changes dramatically. The baby looks away, but differently this time. Not as a regulated pause, as a withdrawal. Posture curls inward. The vocalizations stop. A kind of shutdown begins. Within minutes, babies in the still face condition show measurable physiological stress, elevated cortisol, disrupted heart rate variability. Some begin to cry. Some go quiet in a way that is more disturbing than crying DOT. And here is what Tronick found that made this experiment famous across the scientific world. Even after the mother resumed normal, warm interaction, even after the still face ended and connection was restored, the baby's distress did not immediately resolve. It lingered. The nervous system, once it had learned that connection could disappear without warning, did not immediately trust that it had returned. One brief, deliberate interruption of connection, and the nervous system remembered. Now consider what the opposite experience teaches. A baby whose look away is consistently respected, whose need for a pause is met with patience rather than pursuit, learns something different. It learns how regulation is safe, that needing space does not cost you connection, that you can step back and the relationship will still be there when you return. That lesson, absorbed thousands of times across the first year of life, becomes the foundation of what psychologists call secure attachment. The deep, unshakable sense that relationships can survive distance, that love does not require constant contact to remain real. It all begins with how someone responded to a baby looking away. And now the story becomes yours again, because you were that baby. You sent that signal thousands of times in your first year of life. You looked away, not to leave, but to breathe, to process, to regulate. And the response you received to that signal shaped something deep and lasting in you. If the response was patience, if the people around you let you breathe and waited, you learned that needing space was safe. You developed what researchers call a high window of tolerance, a nervous system that can enter intense experiences, step back from them, and return without losing the thread of connection. If the response was pursuit, pressure, anxiety, an inability to let the gaze break, you may have learned something different. That your need for space was a problem, that stepping back risked losing the connection entirely. And so you learned, slowly, to stop stepping back, to override this signal, to stay in the intensity past the point your nervous system could comfortably hold it. You are not just observing this, you are built from it. The way you handle overwhelm in relationships today, the way you respond when a conversation becomes too much, the way you feel when someone you love needs space from you, all of it threaded. Through it, the memory of those first wordless moments when you turned away and waited to see what the world would do. There is a layer beneath all of this that researchers are only beginning to map, and it connects this tiny infant behavior to something happening in every adult relationship you have ever had. The technical term is co-regulation. It describes the process by which two nervous systems influence and stabilize each other through interaction. And it turns out that this process, which most people assume is something we develop as adults, something sophisticated and learned, actually begins in the very first weeks of life, in the rhythm of engagement and disengagement between a baby and a caregiver. Every time a caregiver correctly reads a look away and responds with calm patience, they are not just being kind. They are lending their regulated nervous system to the baby's unregulated one. They are demonstrating through behavior what a settled nervous system feels like and the baby's physiology. Through the same neural synchrony mechanisms we explored in earlier research, begins to mirror it. The baby borrows the caregiver's calm, and over thousands of repetitions, it begins to build its own. This is where self-regulation comes from, not from teaching a child to manage their emotions, from being a regulated presence alongside them while they practice managing their own. And the haunting implication for adults is this: when we struggle, genuinely struggle, to self-regulate under stress, when overwhelm arrives and we cannot find the pause, cannot access the calm, cannot step back without the whole structure collapsing, We are often not failing at something we were taught. We are missing something we were never given. Not a lesson. A nervous system to borrow a while. We built our own. Here is what all of this means in practical, immediate terms. When a baby looks away from you, whether you are a parent, a grandparent, a friend holding someone's child for the first time, the instinct is often to re-engage, to call their name, to move into their line of sight, to recapture the gaze because losing it feels like losing something. Resist that instinct. The look away is not a loss. It is a request. It is the baby's nervous system saying, I was with you fully, and now I need 10 seconds to process what that meant, and then I will come back. The correct response, the response that builds trust, that builds security, that builds the neural architecture of a child who will one day be able to regulate themselves in a world full of intensity, is simply to wait, to stay present but not pressing, to be there when they turn back. It sounds passive. It is actually one of the most active and important things you can do, because you are not just waiting for eye contact to resume. You are teaching a nervous system its first and most fundamental lesson about the nature of connection, that it is safe to need space, that stepping back does not mean losing everything, that the people who love you will still be there when you turn around. That lesson, if it lands correctly, echoes forward across an entire lifetime of relationships. We live in a world that does not reward looking away. We are taught to hold eye contact as a sign of confidence, to stay present, stay engaged, stay in it regardless of what our nervous system is asking for, to push through the overwhelm, to mistake endurance for strength. And somewhere along the way, we forgot what the baby still knows, that the pause is not weakness. The pause is wisdom. The look away is not retreat. It is the breath before the return. It is the nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do, protecting the connection by briefly stepping outside of it, making space so that when you come back, you can come back fully. The baby who looks away from your eyes is not done with you. It is preparing to see you more clearly.